Welcome to Bore Me to Bed, a place where quiet curiosity drifts gently through the night, where stories unfold like soft blankets and facts are whispered slowly enough to lull you into sleep. There's no drama here, no urgency, just calm thoughts and meandering tales to carry you softly toward rest. Tonight we follow the gentle journey of a plastic bottle, from ancient oceans to filling lines and supermarket shelves to the soft, crinkled heart of a pillow. So if you're ready, let's begin. Just lie back, get comfortable, and let the story carry you, slowly, softly, into sleep. In the hush of ancient waters, countless tiny marine creatures drifted through warm seas. Sunlight illuminated these surface waters, allowing microscopic plants, phytoplankton, to flourish. Small drifting animals, zooplankton, fed among them. When their gentle lives came to an end, their delicate bodies sank slowly to the seabed, settling into soft layers of mud. Year after year, an endless rain of minuscule shells and organic fragments fell through the quiet depths, gathering on the ocean floor. Time passed without hurry, and the sediment grew thick, cocooning those remnants of life in darkness beneath the waves. For long ages, the world above moved on in its endless cycles while these buried layers remained undisturbed. Waves gently stirred the ancient seas overhead, and tides ebbed and flowed. Seasons came and went, whole generations of sea creatures were born and died in turn. But far below the seabed, in the thickening cradle of sediment, all was still. The remains of those tiny creatures entombed in mud slowly began a chemical metamorphosis of their own. As eons slipped by in silence, the weight of sand and silt pressed down gently on the layers beneath. Deep under the ocean floor, where daylight never reached, heat and pressure began their gradual work. The once living plankton and algae, buried so long ago, started to transform. Over the centuries, their complex organic material broke down and recombined into simpler substances. At first, it became a waxy intermediate hidden in the rock, and then, as the heat and pressure increased further, that waxen matter transformed into liquid hydrocarbons, crude oil. Under the Earth's patient embrace, they changed into a rich, dark oil, a liquid fossil quietly waiting its turn to see the light. The world had been utterly transformed since those plankton first floated in the sunlit waters. Mountains had risen and worn away, and creatures like dinosaurs had come and gone without ever knowing of the tiny organisms beneath the ocean floor. Yet down on the ocean floor, the slow burial and transformation carried on, indifferent to the dramatic life on the surface. In fact, much of this organic material had been deposited during the age of dinosaurs, more than 100 million years ago, when the climate was warmer and strange reptiles swam in those seas above. Still, the processes of sedimentation and decay unfolded quietly, far beneath the reach of those ancient beasts. For millions of years, the oil rested, tucked away in porous rock, far beneath ancient seas and later beneath dry land. There in the deep it remained undisturbed, a dense reservoir of stored sunlight from ages past. Through ice ages and warm periods, through the drifting of continents and the rise and fall of mountains, the oil remained patiently in place. Nothing disturbed its slumber but the slow shifting of the earth and stone overhead. It might have stayed hidden for many millions of years more, if not for the curiosity and needs of people in a far distant future. One quiet day in the modern era, above that very spot there came the gentle vibration of machinery. High above the buried oil, on an otherwise calm stretch of land that eons ago had lain under the sea, a drilling rig hummed steadily. Its sound was a low, constant murmur in the air, like a giant mechanical heartbeat in the distance. Bit by bit the drill bored patiently through layers of rock, softly shaking the ground that had slept for so long. In time, the drill reached the ancient reservoir and the slumbering oil within. The oil itself had moved through tiny pores in the rock over time, collecting in a natural pocket or trap beneath an impermeable layer of stone. It waited there, pooled under the Earth's crust, under pressure but contained by solid rock above, like a quiet underground lake of energy. A controlled pressure change coaxed the oil upward, and it began to flow for the first time in geological memory. Slowly the dark liquid rose through the well, moving from the cramped rock pores into human-made pipes. What had once been microscopic sea creatures was now a warm, crude oil, travelling upward with calm inevitability. Emerging from deep underground, the oil arrived at the surface under careful guidance. It was collected and directed into a network of pipes and tanks. From the well, the crude oil flowed gently through insulated pipes that snaked across the landscape, sometimes even warmed slightly to keep the oil moving fluidly. Small pump stations helped it along the way, but all of this was done out of sight and mostly out of mind of anyone nearby. There was no rush. Valves opened and closed methodically, guiding the oil through a deliberate maze of equipment. The oil felt neither discomfort nor joy. It simply flowed where it was guided, in smooth streams through smooth pipes, driven by pumps that thumped in steady rhythm. A short distance away, a refinery awaited, an arrangement of towers and vessels quietly processing many such streams of dark oil. Upon arrival, the oil was allowed to rest briefly in a great storage tank where it settled and calmed after its long ascent. The tank was enormous and still, holding the oil gently while the refinery prepared for the next step. Soon, the oil was drawn into the refining units. It flowed into a tall distillation column, a structure that rose against the sky like a giant metal lighthouse. Around the base of the column, a network of pipes and gauges quietly did their work, channeling fluids and monitoring pressures. Operators in a distant control room watched over the process through flickering screens, but on the refinery floor itself, it was mostly the equipment that carried out its duties with minimal fuss. Inside this column, the oil was heated gradually. As warmth spread through it, different components of the oil began to turn into vapor at their own unhurried pace. Lighter parts drifted upward as faint vapors, and heavier parts lingered lower down as warm liquid. In this way, the crude oil slowly separated into layers, each destined for a different purpose. Within the column, trays and chambers guided the vapors as they cooled and condensed. At various levels, liquids collected, some thin and light, others thicker and heavier. Among these fractions was a particularly light portion called naphtha, a clear, flammable liquid that would become the foundation for new plastic. Drip by drip, the naphtha was drawn off from the column and sent along its own pathway deeper into the refinery. In another part of the facility, the naphtha was transformed further. It was fed into a cracking unit, nicknamed a cracker, which used heat and catalysts to gently break the large naphtha molecules into smaller ones. This process was not sudden or harsh. It was controlled and steady, with the heavy fluid heated until it released lighter gases like ethylene. Inside the cracker's reactors, chemical bonds quietly rearranged, and what emerged was a stream of simpler molecules ready to form plastics. Some of those molecules were destined for a plastic known as PET, short for polyethylene terephthalate, the very substance of a future drinks bottle. In yet another calm chemical plant, these building blocks met. Ethylene was converted to ethylene glycol, a sweet and clear liquid, while another chemical called paraxylene was oxidized to create terephthalic acid, a fine white powder. In large, gleaming vessels, the ethylene glycol and terephthalic acid were combined. Under heat and pressure, with the help of special catalysts, they began to react. One by one, molecules linked together into long chains, forming the polymer called PET. It was as if countless tiny beads were joining on an invisible string, creating threads of a new material. The mixture became a thick, syrupy melt as the polymerization progressed, all of it happening quietly within stainless steel reactors. It was a quietly remarkable transformation. Ancient organic matter becoming a modern material through careful chemistry. When the PET reached the right consistency, the hot mixture was poured out and cooled. As it cooled, it solidified not as one big lump, but as small, convenient pieces. The molten plastic was pushed through fine holes, coming out as long, thin, spaghetti-like strands. These strands were allowed to cool in a bath of water, solidifying into smooth filaments. They were then cut into tiny pellets, each about the size of a grain of rice or a lentil. The pellets were smooth and glassy, catching the overhead light as they tumbled, each one holding the potential to be shaped into something useful. Dozens of these little plastic beads tinkled as they fell into a collection container, sounding softly like distant rain as they gathered. The newly made plastic pellets were dried and stored. Within each tiny pellet were long invisible strands of the PET polymer, all coiled and entangled like minute strands of cooked pasta. These tangled molecular chains gave the plastic its useful combination of strength and flexibility once it was formed into objects. Pouring a handful of them would produce a soft pattering sound, similar to sand flowing in an hourglass. In silos and bags, heaps of these pellets now waited patiently for their next journey. They carried within them the ancient history of the ocean and the energy of long-ago suns, now captured in solid form. Thus, through a combination of geological time and human ingenuity, the raw materials for a plastic bottle came into being. What once was ancient life in the sea had been reborn as tiny granules of plastic, brimming with potential. The stage was set for the next chapter. Those innocuous little beads would soon be heated and given form as a container, a simple plastic bottle, continuing the quiet saga of transformation. In time, a portion of these plastic pellets found themselves on the move again. They were poured into the back of a lorry or sealed into large bags, and then gently transported to a bottling factory many miles away. The journey by road was uneventful and calm. Inside their container, the countless tiny beads shifted with each gentle turn in the road, making a sound like soft rain or sand flowing whenever the lorry went over a bump. The pellets jostled softly in their containers as the lorry rolled along highways and country lanes, but all was dim and quiet inside the trailer. Finally, the vehicle arrived at a modern bottling facility, and the pellets were delivered to their next destination. Inside the bottling factory, everything was organised and steady. The air carried a faint scent of warm plastic and machine oil, but it was not unpleasant. Just the mild aroma of industry at work. The machinery here did not roar. It hummed in a contented, rhythmic way, as operators in quiet uniforms oversaw the automated processes. One of the first steps was to transfer the piet pellets into a large hopper, a huge funnel-shaped container leading into the bottle-making machines. Before the melting process began, the pellets spent time in a drying chamber nearby, where warm air was blown through them to remove any moisture. This ensured that when the pellets did melt, they would do so smoothly and without any unwanted reactions. As production began, the plastic pellets flowed from the hopper down into a heated extruder. This machine slowly turned a screw-like shaft that pushed the pellets along its barrel. Warmth built up gradually, and the pellets began to soften and melt together into a thick, clear liquid. The rattling sound of pellets tapping against metal grew fainter until it ceased, as they lost their solid form and merged into a smooth, molten flow. Heaters around the barrel glowed softly, bringing the temperature of the plastic to just the right point, where it became as viscous and malleable as honey. Inside the barrel, the temperature climbed above 200 degrees Celsius, but it was all carefully controlled. The plastic turned fluid gradually and evenly, with no sudden flashes or flames, only steady, consistent heat transforming solid into liquid. The molten plastic was then injected into a mould to create a preliminary shape known as a preform. Inside the closed mould, the hot plastic quickly conformed to its shape, cooling just enough around the edges to hold form once released. This preform looked like a thick plastic tube, a miniature bottle to be, with a solid body and the bottle's neck and threads already perfectly formed at one end. It emerged from the mould warm and slightly flexible, glowing faintly with heat. Machines gently moved these preforms to the next station, giving them a moment to cool and firm up, though they were still not yet the final shape of a bottle. Next came the step of giving the bottle its full form. One of the cooled preforms was placed into another mould, this one the size and shape of the final bottle, complete with gentle curves and contours. The mould imparted every detail into the new plastic. Perhaps a few subtle ridges along the sides for strength, a flat, stable base at the bottom, and a smooth shoulder leading up to the neck. A quiet puff of sterile air, more a gentle whoosh than a roar, was introduced into the preform, and it expanded like a small balloon. The plastic stretched silently and pressed outward until it filled every part of the cavity, taking on the shape of the mould. In seconds, a new bottle was formed, thin-walled, transparent and perfectly shaped. The once solid preform had stretched into a slender, light container. Its walls were now much thinner than the preforms, slightly flexible to the touch yet strong enough to hold its contents. When the mould opened, the bottle that emerged was now recognisable as a drinks bottle. It was still warm to the touch, but it quickly began to cool in the open air. A conveyor belt carried the freshly moulded bottle along with many identical siblings, all upright and moving in a slow, steady line. They passed under gentle fans that blew cooling air, ensuring the plastic set properly. There was a soft clinking as bottles occasionally brushed against one another, but otherwise the movement was quiet and orderly. The area carried a mild, new plastic scent, that subtle, sweet smell of fresh polymer cooling in the air. Farther down the line, the empty bottles entered a filling station. The filler machine moved in a gentle carousel, bringing each bottle under a nozzle in turn. Valves opened with a soft hiss, and water streamed in without splashing, filling the bottle to just the right level. Here, each bottle was smoothly filled with cool, purified water drawn from a nearby source. The water flowing into each bottle had its own gentle journey before this moment. It might have fallen as the rain on distant hillsides. Those raindrops began their journey in clouds that had formed high in the sky, as warm air rose from the sea, cooling and condensing. When the time was right, the clouds released their cargo. Some rain fell softly onto broad green leaves and mossy ground, soaking in gradually. A portion of that rainwater trickled slowly into the earth, passing through layers of soil and rock. It joined underground springs and streams, naturally filtering as it travelled beneath green fields and quiet forests. In time, that water was drawn from deep wells and reservoirs not far from the bottling plant. It was carefully purified through simple, reassuring processes, passing through fine sands and charcoal filters, then exposed to a soft ultraviolet light that ensured its clarity and safety. Before filling, the purified water was collected in a large stainless steel holding tank where it rested briefly, still and cool under the gentle watch of the plant's technicians. By the time it arrived at the filling station, the water was crystal clear and cool, carrying with it the purity of its slow journey. Now, in the hushed moment of filling, this water met the bottle, merging two journeys into one. The water made a soft splashing sound as it flowed in, and the bottle felt the cool weight of a liquid filling its interior. Once the precise amount of water was dispensed, the nozzle withdrew and an automated arm moved in with a cap. A clean blue cap was pressed onto the bottle's threaded top and twisted snugly with a gentle mechanical twist, sealing the water inside. There was a small click as the cap locked into place, a satisfying assurance that the bottle was now securely closed. Now filled and capped, the bottle continued its journey along the conveyor. It passed through a light shower of warm water that rinsed off any stray droplets or dust on its exterior. The droplets rolled off the smooth sides of the bottle, and gentle air blowers then dried it, their breeze barely more than a whisper. Next, the bottle received its label, a thin plastic wrapper that was sleeved around its middle. A burst of warm air shrank the label so it hugged the bottle's surface without a wrinkle. In a matter of minutes, our once raw plastic pellets had become a fully formed, filled and labelled water bottle, ready to be packaged for delivery. At the end of the production line, mechanical arms carefully grouped the bottles and placed them into a cardboard box. Our bottle found itself snug in a case with perhaps a dozen others, all standing side by side. The box flaps were closed, enveloping the bottles in a muted darkness, with just a bit of light peeking through small handholds in the cardboard. Within the box, the bottles were pressed gently together, giving each other quiet company. For a short while, the box of bottles sat in a storage area of the factory, along with many other boxes prepared that day. There was a calm stillness in this interim storage space. The air here was cooler and dry, and only a faint hum from distant machinery could be heard. Our bottle, nestled in its box, simply rested. It was surrounded by the soft pressure of its neighbours and the faint smell of cardboard and plastic. Everything was in place. Nothing urgent disturbed the peace. Before long, it was time for these bottles to leave the factory. A forklift came by with a gentle electric whir, its tyres rolling quietly on the concrete floor. The forklift scooped up the pallet of boxes that included our bottles box. As it lifted, there was a slight sensation of rising, but it was smooth and steady. The pallet was then carried to a loading bay, where a lorry waited with its back door open. Inside the lorry's trailer it was dim and cool. The forklift set the pallet down inside with care, causing just a soft thump as it settled. Workers secured the pallet and others like it inside the trailer, fastening them so they would not shift during transit. Each action was done efficiently but gently. Straps were tightened with a firm, quiet pull. Soon after, the trailer's doors were closed with a muffled clang, and darkness surrounded the box of bottles. All was still again for a brief moment. In that darkness, our bottle sat patiently, with no sense of the miles ahead, only the soft sounds of the lorry's engine starting and a faint vibration signalling the beginning of another journey. Packed safely among its fellows, our newly made bottle was leaving the only environment it had known so far. Having been moulded, filled and packaged, it was now ready to venture beyond the factory's doors. In the darkness of the lorry's trailer it stood quietly, its water gently sloshing inside, awaiting the road ahead. All around it, other identical bottles stood quietly as well, sharing in this gentle departure from the factory. As the lorry pulled away from the factory, the gentle rumble of its engine resonated through the trailer. To the bottles inside, it was a steady vibration, almost like the purring of a contented cat. The vehicle gained speed gradually, and soon it was cruising along the smooth roads leading away from the plant. Outside, the late afternoon sun gilded the landscape with warm light, but inside the trailer it remained cool and dim. For a long while, the journey continued calmly. The road stretched ahead, and the driver steered the lorry with easy confidence. The bottle, tucked in darkness, was unaware of the passing scenery. But if one could imagine the outside, perhaps rolling green fields bordered by hedgerows, and the sky slowly shifting colours as evening approached. Golden sunlight stretched across farm fields, and in the distance perhaps a few lights in cottages began to flicker on as evening approached. A gentle river might have wound through the fields, reflecting the sky's colours, though all of this went unnoticed by the cargo within. As dusk settled, the world outside grew quieter. The first stars began to appear in the dusky sky above, faint pinpoints of light watching over the road. The lorry's headlights cast soft beams on the road ahead, and the tail lights glowed red in the growing dark. Inside the trailer, the bottles only sensed motion and sound, the engine's low drone, the occasional gentle shift when the lorry took a curve, and the faint thump whenever the road surface changed. It was a lulling rhythm, like a cradle rocking ever so slightly. Later that night, clouds gathered and a light rain began to fall. Raindrops tapped on the metal roof of the trailer, creating a soft, irregular patter. Each droplet's impact was muffled, so inside it sounded like a distant whisper tapping overhead. The bottle rested in its box, listening in its own silent way to the rain's lullaby. The pattering of rain, combined with the steady vibration of the moving lorry, made the atmosphere feel cozy and drowsy. The whole world of the bottle had narrowed to this small, dark space, accompanied by the whisper of rain and the soft murmur of the engine. Through the truck's windshield, the highway stretched ahead, as twin ribbons of soft red lights from cars in the distance. The surrounding countryside was mostly dark, with only a few farmhouse windows twinkling in the distance. Occasionally the lorry passed under a bridge or by a sleeping village near the road, where rows of houses sat quiet and dim, their residents tucked in bed. Every now and then a gentle gust of wind would sway the bushes by the roadside. Inside the cab, the driver might have sipped from a flask of tea, or quietly hummed along to a low radio, keeping himself company in the solitude of the drive. The journey through the night was uneventful and gentle. Once or twice the lorry slowed and stopped, perhaps at a quiet service station to let the driver rest and have a cup of tea. During those stops, the engine's vibration ceased, and the sudden stillness was filled only by the sound of rain falling more clearly on the roof. At one quiet rest stop, as the driver took a break, the trailer stood still under a sodium lamp, rainwater trickling down its sides. Perhaps another lorry idled softly in the distance. After a short break, the engine started up again with a low growl, and the lorry resumed its travels. The bottle remained snug among its companions, secure in the darkness, with no sense of worry or hurry, only the calm progression of the night. By the early hours before dawn, the rain had passed and the lorry was drawing near to its destination. The sky outside was still dark, with just a hint of grey suggesting the coming day. Around dawn, a faint mist hovered above the dew-laden ground, and a chorus of early birds was beginning to stir in the hedgerows. The lorry finally pulled into a quiet unloading area at the back of a supermarket. The engine slowed and then switched off, leaving a tranquil silence in place of its steady hum. Soon, the trailer's doors swung open, allowing the cool morning air to spill inside and the first light of day to streak across the pallets of goods. A couple of birds chirped somewhere in the distance, the sound crisp in the fresh air. A worker climbed into the trailer, boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. The stillness was now gently stirred by human activity. The pallet holding our bottles box was unfastened and rolled out carefully. A small jolt went through the box as it was lowered to the ground, but nothing was harsh or sudden. In the soft light of early morning, our bottle was still out of sight inside its cardboard enclosure, but all around it the day was beginning. The pallet was wheeled into the store's back room, a space filled with shelves of stock and the faint smell of cardboard and cleaning detergent. There the box sat for a short time among many other deliveries, each waiting to be unpacked and placed on the store shelves. Before long, an employee came by and began to stock the drinks aisle. The box was carried on a trolley to the front and its flaps were opened with a quiet rip of tape. Bright fluorescent lighting and the colours of the store came into view as the cardboard gave way. The worker lifted out one bottle after another, placing them neatly in a row on the shelf. When our bottle was lifted out, it felt a gentle squeeze from the person's hand, then found itself standing upright on the cool metal shelf, surrounded by identical bottles on either side. Under the store lights, the bottle's clear water sparkled just a little behind the label. It could now see, in a manner of speaking. Though a bottle has no eyes, it was now in the open, part of the world. The store was calm this early in the day, with only a few customers strolling through aisles. A soft instrumental music played overhead, barely noticeable, mixing with the occasional beep from a checkout counter further away. Nearby, a refrigerator hummed quietly, but in the drinks aisle where the bottle stood, the air was just slightly cool, not cold. For some time, the bottle simply stood on the shelf, content in its stillness. It may have been an hour or more that it remained there, watching quietly as the store gradually grew busier. A few customers passed by the shelves, taking other bottles or items, but many left our bottle undisturbed for a while. This waiting was peaceful and without expectation. The bottle had no sense of time, only the experience of being present amid the gentle flow of store life. People passed now and then, the sound of a trolley rolling by or soft voices discussing a product. These sounds were gentle and echoed softly in the large space. Sunlight began to peek through the front windows of the store, mingling with the indoor lighting to bring a friendly morning glow to the surroundings. A gentle aroma of baking bread and fresh coffee from a small in-store bakery drifted through the aisles, mingling with the clean scent of the morning. Eventually, a customer reached for our bottle. A warm hand wrapped around its smooth, cool sides and lifted it off the shelf. The sudden movement was still careful and calm. The bottle was placed into a basket among a few other items, perhaps some fruit, bread, or a newspaper. The shopper carried the basket through the aisle, each step causing the items in the basket to shift slightly. The water inside the bottle swayed with each motion, a slow, tiny wave that went back and forth, unnoticed by anyone but quietly present within the bottle. A short while later, the basket was set down at a checkout counter. The cashier, speaking in a soft, polite voice, scanned each item. When it came time for the bottle, it was lifted and placed momentarily on its side to read the barcode. The scanner beeped softly, and then the bottle was placed into a shopping bag. Nestled alongside the other groceries in the bag, the bottle felt secure once more in a contained space. The automatic doors of the shop whooshed open as the customer walked out, and the bottle was carried outside into the open air. The morning had blossomed into a mild, pleasant day. The sidewalks were still relatively quiet, only a few people were about, and the gentle rumble of distant morning traffic was muted by the buildings. A few sparrows flitted from a nearby tree, greeting the day with soft chirps. Our bottle, peeking from the top of the bag, felt the warmth of a sunbeam on its cap. The light made the droplets on its surface, from condensation or the earlier rinse, glint momentarily. It was a gentle welcome into the wider world beyond the factory and store. The person carrying the bottle walked a short distance to a nearby park, drawn by the mild sunshine and the inviting shade of trees. Finding an empty bench beneath a broad leafy tree, they sat down with a gentle sigh. The park was quiet this morning. Only a few other people strolled leisurely on the paths. One elderly man ambled by with a grey-muzzled dog at his side. The dog paused to sniff the grass while the man eventually sat on a far bench to rest. In another corner, a mother quietly pushed a pram along, lulling her baby to sleep with a gentle motion. Our bottle was brought out of the bag and set on the bench for a moment while the person adjusted their belongings. The bottle's clear surface reflected the green of the leaves above in a soft, distorted way. Now and then, a ray of sun passing through the bottle cast a tiny rainbow on the bench, a shifting pattern of light that trembled whenever the bottle was moved. After a minute, the person picked up the bottle and twisted the cap open. There was a slight crackle as the tamper-evident seal on the cap broke, a quiet snap that quickly faded into the hush of the park. The cap came off with a tiny pop, and a few tiny bubbles in the water shifted with the movement. Lifting the bottle to their lips, the person took a slow sip of the cool water. They savoured the sensation of the cool liquid easing their thirst, pausing between sips to breathe the fresh air. The water level inside the bottle gently lowered, and a bit of air flowed in to replace the volume, making a subtle gurgle that only the bottle would notice. The person sat peacefully, gazing at the surroundings as they drank. They might have been watching the sunlight dance through the moving leaves, or perhaps observing a squirrel scampering across the lawn, or watching a butterfly flutter erratically among the wildflowers nearby. The person took a deep breath and relaxed, feeling the warmth of the sunshine on their face and the faint stirring of the breeze against their skin. With each sip, the water inside the bottle diminished. Between sips, the bottle was set down on the bench or held loosely in the person's hand, the remaining water swishing gently at the bottom. The plastic felt smooth and slightly damp with condensation against their fingers. A soft breeze passed through the park, bringing the faint smell of cut grass and blooming flowers. The bottle, now half empty, rested against the bench's wooden slats. From its vantage, it could sense the serenity of the scene, the rustling leaves making a sound like a distant whisper, the lazy drift of a cloud across the sky overhead, and the distant sound of a fountain splashing calmly at the park's centre. After a pleasant stretch of time, the person lifted the bottle again and took the last long drink, draining it of all but a few clinging droplets. With the water gone, the bottle was light and hollow. It made a soft crinkling sound as the person's hand gripped it firmly. Without the liquid inside, the thin walls flexed just a little. The cap was screwed back on, not tightly now, but just to keep those last drops from escaping. Finished with their rest, the person lingered a moment more, enjoying the calm of the park. Eventually, they rose from the bench, feeling refreshed. They looked around for a bin to dispose of the empty bottle. Just a short walk away stood a recycling bin, painted a calming shade of green and marked with the familiar triangular recycling symbol. The person carried the empty bottle over. With a casual motion, the bottle was dropped through the opening. The person scarcely gave it another thought as they turned to leave, trusting that the empty bottle would find its way to be used again. The bottle slid down and landed inside the bin with a soft thud against other plastic items. The sound was a gentle plastic clatter, not loud at all in the open air. Inside the bin, the daylight filtered through a small gap, illuminating a little scene of fellow empties, a couple of other plastic bottles, some aluminium cans glinting silver, and a glossy magazine someone had folded and discarded. Our bottle now lay on its side atop this small pile of recyclables. A few drops of leftover water inside it rolled along its length until they pooled at one end, then slowly evaporated in the warmth of the afternoon. The day continued to drift by quietly. The sun crept across the sky, and shadows of the park's trees shifted slowly over the ground. Each time the bin's lid opened, a brief shaft of light would fall inside, and perhaps another bottle or can would tumble in. Some landed with a clink or a thump, but none of these sounds were too sharp or alarming, just occasional additions to the growing collection. For the bottle, it was a period of stillness and waiting, surrounded by the faint mingled smells of old soda, paper and plastic. Evening came, and the last golden light of the sun slanted through the trees of the park. The air cooled and the daily bustle faded away. The bin was nearly full by now, containing the day's gather of recyclables. In the dimness within, our bottle was tucked safely amongst its companions. Everything was quiet, save for the distant chirping of crickets beginning as night fell. A few lamps along the park's paths flickered on, casting gentle circles of light on the walkway, but the park itself was nearly empty and profoundly still. After some time, perhaps the next morning when dew still coated the grass, or perhaps a scheduled collection day, the recycling bin was collected by the local waste crew. a large recycling lorry rolled up with a quiet rumble. One of the workers, moving with a routine efficiency, opened the bin and hooked it to the side of the truck's lift. With a mechanical whir, the bin was tilted and emptied into the truck's storage compartment. Our bottle, along with all the other contents, slid out and cascaded into the truck. For a moment, there was a jumble of shapes and colours as bottles and cans tumbled in together, rustling and clinking. It was a brief flurry of motion and sound in an otherwise still morning. Inside the truck, the bottle found itself mixed with a larger heap of recyclables gathered from other bins. The air was a bit dense with the combined odours of plastic, wet paper, and a hint of something sweet from leftover drinks, but it was not overwhelming. As the truck continued its route, a compressing mechanism gently pressed the pile inward to make space. The bottle felt a squeeze as it was pressed against other plastics. Its sides flexed, and it nestled into a new position, now slightly flattened but none the worse for wear. The lorry trundled through town, stopping and starting, collecting more materials from other bins along the way. Each stop was accompanied by the now familiar sequence of the bin being lifted, a cascade of recyclables joining the existing load, and the soft crushing to pack it in. All of this happened with unhurried regularity. The bottle, no longer distinct among so many items, simply went along for the ride, surrounded by the gentle chaos of the collected recyclables. At last, the collection route was complete, and the lorry made its way to the recycling centre on the outskirts of town. The morning sun was higher now, and the city was waking up. But for our bottle, everything remained within the dim interior of the truck's hopper, jostling slightly with each turn of the wheels. Soon, however, the collection run finished, and our bottle's load arrived at a materials recovery facility. The start of a new phase in its journey, where the cast-off things of daily life are sorted and prepared for rebirth. At the recycling facility, the lorry entered a large building with high ceilings and bright lights. The air was filled with a steady mechanical hum. Mixed in were other soft mechanical sounds, the whir of motors, the clatter of items moving along conveyors, and the occasional clang when a metal can fell into a collection bin. This orchestra of gentle noise echoed in the high-ceilinged space, creating a peculiar kind of industrial lullaby. Inside, workers and machines were already awake and busy sorting through heaps of recyclable materials. The lorry came to a stop at the unloading area, and after a moment its back door was opened. A mechanism tilted the lorry's container, and with a slow cascade, the collected recyclables slid out. Our bottle, still intact though a bit flattened, along with countless others, tumbled gently onto a concrete floor in a designated sorting zone. There was a rustling, clinking chorus as plastic, metal and paper fell into a loose pile. It was not chaotic or violent, just the sound of many light objects coming to rest. For a brief while, the bottle lay on this pile, looking up, as it were, at a cavernous space. Shafts of morning light cut in through open loading doors, illuminating dust motes in the air. Not far away, a front-end loader was humming. It soon moved towards the new pile, its engine a low drone, and its big rubber tyres rolling slowly. The loader's wide bucket scooped up a portion of the pile, including our bottle. Gently, it lifted everything up and dropped the mix of recyclables onto the start of a conveyor belt system. The bottle slid from the bucket onto the moving belt with a soft thud, now beginning its journey through the sorting machinery. The conveyor belt carried the bottle and a jumble of papers, plastics and metals into the heart of the facility. Overhead lights cast a bright, even glow, and a subtle vibration came through the belt as it moved. The first stop was a shaking trommel, a large rotating drum with holes which sifted out small bits of debris and dirt. The bottle, being too large to fall through the holes, continued onward, leaving behind tiny scraps that rained down like confetti into another container below. The ride was a bit bouncy, but nothing the bottle couldn't handle. Next, the conveyor carried everything under a powerful magnet that hung above the belt. With a dull thwop, metal cans made of steel leapt upward and stuck to the magnet. Removing themselves from the stream, our plastic bottle, being non-magnetic, simply carried on, along with aluminium cans and other plastics. A short distance later, a swiftly spinning drum created an eddy current that pushed aluminium cans off to one side into a separate bin with a gentle clatter. The separated metals would each go off to their own recycling, steel cans to smelters to be melted and cast anew, and aluminium cans to furnaces where they would swiftly become molten and ready to form fresh metal items. Even the paper and cardboard that had been filtered out earlier had their next chapter in a paper mill, where they would be pulped and made into new paper products. Every material in this stream had a future, carefully sorted so that nothing useful would be lost. The lighter aluminium flew off almost magically, guided by invisible forces of physics. Although aluminium isn't magnetic, the spinning separator created tiny electric currents in the cans that gently nudged them aside into their bin. The plastic bottle, heavier and not affected by these forces, stayed on the belt, continuing down the line with other plastic containers and remaining paper. Human hands also played a role. At certain points, workers stood by the conveyor, picking out items that the machines might miss or that didn't belong. They worked calmly and efficiently, plucking out stray plastic bags or pieces of trash and tossing them into appropriate chutes. One worker briefly noticed our clear bottle rolling along and, seeing it was a PET plastic bottle with a label, left it to continue to the next sorter meant for plastics like it. Further along, an optical sorting machine awaited. As the items spread out on the belt, a sensor flashed a quick beam of light and identified types of plastic by their unique signature. The machine recognized our bottle's material, PET plastic, among the mix. In response, as the bottle reached a certain point, a gentle burst of air puffed from a nozzle below the belt. In an instant, the bottle was lifted and pushed onto a different adjacent conveyor. It landed softly among other plastic bottles of its kind, now sorted and separated from paper, metal, and other plastics. This PET-only conveyor moved upward slightly and deposited its load into a large bin where many other bottles had already collected. For the first time since leaving the park bin, our bottle was surrounded mostly by its own kind, clear and greenish plastic bottles, some crinkled, some whole, all destined for recycling. It rested there with them until the bin was full. Once the collection bin had gathered enough, the contents were fed into a baling machine. This machine gently pushed the bottles together, squeezing them into a dense block to make them easier to handle and transport. Our bottle was compressed firmly alongside dozens of others. As the press applied pressure, the plastic bottles flattened against each other. There were muted squeaks and crackles as the air was pressed out of them, and their forms yielded. It was a tight embrace, but not harmful, just enough to bind them all into a solid unit. Wire ties were wrapped around the bundle to keep it compact. In the end, the bottle found itself embedded in the centre of a large rectangular bale of plastic, with only a few pieces of it visible amidst the colourful strata of compressed bottles. From the outside, the bale was like a giant cube of confetti, with layers of flattened bottles in various colours pressed tightly together. The whole block was bound with wires, solid and heavy, ready to be shipped. The bale was moved out of the baler and set aside in a storage area with many other bales. Each bale sat like a big cube made of layered plastics, waiting for the next stage. It was quiet in that storage area. Shafts of light from high windows fell on stacks of these blocks. Our bottle, secure in the middle of one bale, could not see, but it was now in a kind of pause again, a stillness before further travels. It might have stayed there for a day or two, or perhaps a week, as the recycling centre gathered enough material to send to processing plants. During this waiting period, the compressed bottles simply rested. At night, when the day's bustle stopped, the storage area was still and dimly lit by a few overhead lamps. The bales of plastic cast long, blocky shadows on the concrete floor. Now and then, one of the bales would emit a quiet creak as the plastic inside settled further, but otherwise all was silent. It was a pause in the journey, a gentle interlude of inaction that was just as important as the movement, giving everything time to be ready for what came next. Eventually the day came when the PET bales were to be shipped to a reprocessing facility. A forklift arrived with its soft beep and carried the heavy bale out to another lorry. The bale was loaded with a dull thud among others, and once more our bottle was on the move, though this time it was just one part of a much larger cargo. The lorry set off, and our bottle, tucked deep in the bale, felt nothing of the road or the scenery, only the subtle vibration through the dense mass of plastic around it. The journey to the recycling plant was not very long. Soon enough, the lorry arrived at a plant specialising in turning old plastic into new products. This plant was one of many around the world where discarded plastics found new beginnings. Each day, in various quiet factories like this, mountains of used bottles are patiently cleaned, melted, and reformed into useful materials again. It all happens mostly out of sight, a humble process of renewal that continues even as people go about their lives, often unaware of the travels their recyclables take. The bale was unloaded and placed in a receiving area along with several other bales from different places. The air here smelled faintly of molten plastic and steam, a hint of what was to come. Though still confined in its bale, the bottle's transformation into something new was drawing nearer, in the calm and methodical world of recycling that lay ahead. At the plastics reprocessing plant, the next stage of transformation began. First, the bale of bottles was taken apart. Workers or automated cutters snipped the tight metal wires, and the compressed stack of bottles sprang slightly apart as the tension was released. Our bottle, along with many others, was pulled free from the bale and moved along a conveyor towards a shredding machine. This machine, enclosed to muffle sound, contained rotating blades that would chop the bottles into small pieces. One by one, bottles were fed in. When it was our bottle's turn, it entered the shredder's mouth. The blades inside turned with a steady mechanical growl, but it was a controlled and monotonous sound, not too harsh. The sharp cutters sliced the plastic into flakes roughly the size of confetti. The bottle was no longer in one piece, yet this was not an end so much as a new beginning. All the flakes, including those that had been our bottle, fell out of the shredder into a collection bin. They were irregularly shaped, lightweight, and a mix of colours from various labels and bottle types. A gentle conveyor carried these flakes onward. Next came a thorough cleaning. The flakes were poured into large washing vessels filled with warm water and gentle detergents. The water swirled softly as paddles stirred the mixture, helping to scrub any remaining sugars from drinks, bits of paper label or glue from the plastic. The warm, sudsy bath loosened any remnants of drink or dirt clinging to the plastic. For several minutes the flakes soaked and tumbled, giving up the last bits of their former contents. The washing solution carried those away, gradually turning slightly cloudy with dissolved sugars and dust. But by the end of the wash cycle, the plastic pieces were noticeably cleaner and ready for fresh water. Lighter contaminants, like fragments of label or the plastic from bottle caps, floated upward and were skimmed away. Those skimmed off bits, labels and caps, would follow their own path. Made of different plastics, they might be sent to other recycling streams or used as fuel to help power the plant. They had done their job protecting and identifying the bottle, and now gently bowed out of its story. Heavier, clean PET flakes sank to the bottom and were drawn out once they were washed. The wash water carried away any last traces of the bottle's previous life as a container for food or drink. After washing, the clean flakes were thoroughly rinsed with fresh water and sent through a dryer. In the drying stage, the flakes moved through a large tumbler with warm air blowing through it. Imagine a clothes dryer but on a larger scale. As it turned, the plastic bits tumbled around, and hot air gently removed all moisture. By the end, the PET flakes were clean, dry, and ready to be transformed again. The next step was melting and forming new material. The dry flakes were funneled into an extruder, similar to the one that had once made the bottle in the first place, but this time its purpose was to create fibres. The flakes entered a hopper, and a screw inside the extruder began to turn, pushing them along a heated barrel. Slowly the plastic flakes melted down into a thick, clear liquid once more. It was reminiscent of the earlier melting process at the bottle factory, but now it felt more like a return to a fundamental form, a warm, viscous flow of plastic, purified and renewed. Before the molten PET reached the spinneret, it passed through fine mesh filters that caught any stray particles or unmelted bits, ensuring the liquid was smooth and pure. Under carefully controlled pressure, the liquid plastic was extruded through a device called a spinneret, a metal plate punctured with many tiny holes, not unlike a shower head but much finer. The melt jets were cooled in a vertical shaft, a column where air was gently blown upward, whispering past the new filaments and carrying away the heat. As the molten PET emerged, it came out as dozens of thin strands. At first, these strands were hot and glowing, as delicate as spider silk but made of liquid plastic. They trailed down through the long cooling chamber, gradually cooling and solidifying along their descent. The winding spools applied a gentle pull, drawing the new fibres slightly to align their molecules and give them strength. Gradually, along their descent, the strands turned solid. What started as molten threads became solid polyester fibres, long, hair-thin strings of plastic. They gathered onto a spinning spool at the bottom of the chamber, or were sprayed with a light mist to cool them more. These continuous filaments of recycled PET were soft to the touch and had a slight sheen. Depending on the intended use, some of the fibres were left as continuous filament, while others were cut into shorter lengths called staple fibre for pillow filling. In fact, some of the continuous filaments might later be spun into yarns to be knitted or woven into soft fabrics, perhaps to make a cosy fleece jacket or a durable reusable shopping bag. The shorter staple fibres, light and fluffy, were perfect for filling items like pillows, duvets, or even cuddly toys. This recycled polyester could take many forms, but in every case it would be soft, clean, and ready for its new purpose. After cutting, the fibres were crimped, a process that added tiny waves to each strand, making them springy and able to trap air, which in turn makes a pillow soft and puffy. The crimping was done by feeding the fibres through heated rollers that gently pressed a wavy pattern into them. The result was a mass of curly, cotton-like fluff, pure white and cloud-soft. It resembled a kind of artificial cotton or down, often called fibre fill, a material that feels as comforting as natural stuffing. Because it was made at high temperatures and thoroughly cleaned, the fibre was free of dust or allergens. It wouldn't attract mould or mites, remaining hygienic and gentle for anyone who would rest on it. These polyester fibres, made from our bottle and thousands of others like it, were collected into large bags. The fibre was completely clean and free of impurities, no dust, no mites or allergens, making it very suitable for items like pillows and quilts that people trust to sleep on. A machine gathered them as they came off the line, forming a big, airy bundle. Every so often, a bundle was completed and automatically tied. When a bag was full, it was sealed and set aside, plump with soft fibre fill. To the eye, it looks no different from traditional pillow stuffing or cotton candy, just a billowy collection of white fluff. To the touch, it was light and resilient, bouncing back gently when pressed. After quality checks and a bit of rest time to ensure they cooled fully, the bags of fibre were sent to a pillow manufacturing area, sometimes in the same facility, or perhaps a nearby factory dedicated to making bedding. There the final transformation would take place. In a quiet sewing room, rolls of fabric were being cut and stitched to form empty pillow casings. The fabric was often a smooth cotton poly blend, tightly woven and snow-white. Workers or machines guided the cloth under sewing needles, which rose and fell with a rhythmic clack that was surprisingly soft in the large space, more of a rapid tapping than a harsh sound. One end of each pillow casing was left open for filling. A filling machine was positioned nearby, a device with a large nozzle attached to a blower. When activated, it would gently puff the fluffy recycled fibre into the pillowcase until it was filled to a pleasant plumpness. One of these empty pillow slips was slipped over the filling nozzle. Then, with a soft whoosh of air, a stream of our bottle's transformed material, now in the form of countless tiny fibres, was blown into the casing. The fibre swirled inside the fabric shell, piling up and expanding to fill the corners. The pillow grew rounder and fuller, yet remained soft and pliable. When the desired weight of filling was inside, the blower stopped. The pillow, now filled, was removed from the machine. It looked like a big, inviting cloud. The hollows between fibres held air, giving the pillow a plush, airy quality. When pressed, it would yield softly and then rebound, ready to support again. A worker took the open end and guided it under a sewing machine to stitch it closed. The sewing machine made a gentle whir as it neatly closed the seam, sealing all that fluffy filling inside. And so, the journey had taken our plastic from a bottle to a pillow. The finished pillow was given a few pats and a shake, allowing the fill to distribute evenly. It was then placed with others, ready for use. The pillow was indistinguishable from any other high-quality pillow. No one could tell just by looking or touching that its soft insides were once a collection of plastic bottles. After a brief stay in the factory's storage, the pillows were packaged for distribution. They were slipped into protective covers or bags to keep them clean, and then boxed for shipping. Our particular pillow, containing fibres from our bottle, eventually found its way to a shop. It sat on display, or in an online order fulfillment centre for a short time, until someone selected it, perhaps drawn by its comfort or an eco-conscious label noting recycled content, or simply by its softness. One afternoon, in a quiet home goods shop with soft lighting, a customer approached a display of these pillows. They gently squeezed a few to test their softness. Our pillow, plump and gentle, caught their attention. Pressing a hand into it, they felt it spring back softly, supporting without being too firm. Deciding it was just right, the customer tucked the pillow under their arm to purchase it, possibly noting a small tag that mentioned it was made with recycled fibres. It wasn't a major factor for them, just a nice thought that something recycled could feel so new and comfortable. A short time later, the pillow found itself in their home ready to be used. In the end, the pillow came to rest in a home, a quiet bedroom painted in gentle colours. On the bed, fresh linens were laid out, and the new pillow was placed at the head, plump and inviting. Earlier, the new owner had slipped a clean pillowcase over it, a pillowcase smelling faintly of recent laundry, with a pattern of soft blue stripes. Now the pillow, dressed in its cover, awaited its first night of use. That night, as the household settled down and the lights were dimmed, the pillow received the weight of a tired head. It cradled its new owner with a plush, gentle support. Inside that pillow, the fibres that were once part of a plastic bottle conformed softly, sharing the comfort they were designed to provide. The room was tranquil and dark, save for a sliver of moonlight peeking through the curtains. Through the window, a sliver of moonlight spilled onto the floor, and one could faintly hear a night breeze rustling the leaves outside. But inside, those sounds were muffled and comforting, part of the backdrop of a sleeping world. As the person on the bed breathed slowly and drifted into sleep, the pillow bore witness in its own silent way to a moment of rest. The sleeper unconsciously nuzzled into the pillow, finding a sweet spot of comfort. Their breathing settled into a steady, deep rhythm in harmony with the calm of the room. It was a calm, fulfilling conclusion to a long journey. The plastic that had originated from ancient life in the sea, that had travelled through factories and trucks and taken the shape of a bottle, had been given a second life, bringing comfort and peace. Now it would spend its nights in quietude, supporting dreams and reflecting, if it could, on the gentle cycles of change and renewal that had brought it here. There had been patience in every phase of its odyssey. The Earth's slow geological rhythms, the measured work of factories, and the gradual adaptation from one use to the next. Nothing was rushed, yet everything was accomplished in time. It was a humble testament to how things in our world transform, from sunlight and plankton, to oil and plastic, to comfort and rest, changing shape but continuing on. In many ways, the bottle story was akin to the cycles found in nature. Rain falls and later rises as vapour, only to fall again. A plant grows, wilts, and its remains feed the soil for new plants. Here too was a cycle. The bottle had been born from ancient remains, lived a short life as a container, and then been reborn into something new. There was a gentle wisdom in this repetition, a reassurance that even what seems used up can find purpose again in a different form. In the soft stillness of the midnight hour, everything was quiet, and the journey of the plastic bottle had become part of a peaceful bedtime story of its own. All was as it should be, and in the great silence of night, the world itself seemed to be at rest, content, and unhurried. And so the journey comes to rest. What began in the warmth of ancient seas, travelled through time, through hands and machines and gentle transformations, to become something soft, still, and comforting. The plastic bottle's story, like so many things in life, was quiet but full of change. A cycle of becoming, of being useful, then becoming useful again. No rush, no fanfare, just slow, simple purpose. Now, with its journey complete, the bottle rests, just as you can rest. Let your thoughts drift like water, your breath slow like clouds, and your body sink gently into the quiet. Thanks for joining me. Sleep well.